Hi everyone, welcome to the webinar. Thank you for joining for the second in our L&D expert series. I think we've got about 12 or 15 in the series so far. I can't see exactly who's joining, but we'll give it about 30 seconds and I'll make a start properly. So thank you for joining. We'll kick off shortly. Hi everyone, if you're just joining, I think we'll just make a start because I know we've only got about 40 minutes today. So thanks very much for joining. As I said, the second in our L&D expert series. And for this webinar, we'll be focusing on how we can really ensure learning sticks beyond the workshop. And obviously all of the investment that's been put in is realised. So we'll be getting into this very soon. But before we do, I just wanted to introduce other members of the panel that are with me today. So my name is Jenny, Head of L&D UK here at Amberjack. I'm delighted to be joined by some wonderful experts in the early talent space. Anna, CEO and founder of the Talent Lighthouse, a fountain of all knowledge when it comes to into the early and careers space, and also a qualified coach. Working globally prior to setting up the Talent Lighthouse. So thanks so much, Anna, for joining. And then Joe, Global Early Talent Lead at Belron, with equally impressive experience in this space and who we've been delighted to partner with over the last year or so, we've been supporting with the design and delivery of the Belron trainee programme. So I'll be kicking the session off and then passing over to Joe and Anna as we go through. And please do put any questions in the chat. There does seem to be a bit of a technical issue with the Q&A, so please do use the chat rather than the Q&A, and we'll be monitoring that as we go through and try and respond to as many questions at the end. So I suppose just to kick us off, why are we all here? Learning is an investment, and therefore obviously really important that it makes a difference and that it's additive rather than just being a bit of a tick box exercise or something you shout about as part of the attraction campaign. So it needs to be meaningful and it needs to be really aligned with your vision for the programme. Actually, much more on this topic next week in our webinar, where we'll be exploring in more detail the creation of a learning value proposition and making sure that it aligns to business objectives. So if that's an area of interest for you, then obviously please do join that. But today it's all about how we make learning stick. And importantly for this generation, it needs to be really engaging for them and it needs to really resonate with them. And as I've said, it obviously needs to deliver the results that you're expecting. So where do you want your early talent to be as they move through the programme? What skills do you want them to be embedding? Thinking about what retention rates you're after, what level of role do you want them to be moving into post-programme? All of these questions are really important to be asking as you think about how you're setting up your programme and then where you want it to get to at the end. And what we're going to look at today, just thinking about why human skills are so important and how the environment and the world that we're living in are really playing into how this generation learn and where we really need to create that laser focus. So I think this insight in terms of the environment and the world in which they're living in is really important so that we can ensure that the learning journey and the development programs that we create really resonate and drive change in the behaviours, and then you get that transfer of learning. And then we'll take a look at the value of coaching and some other really immersive approaches to learning, and which will then enable us to kind of maximise the stickiness of all of the development opportunities that you're providing. So I just wanted to take a few moments to reflect on this quote before we think about how we can really make learning stick. We need to think about where we want to invest our finite time and money. So what's going to give us the biggest return? And I think teaching human skills in the workplace And I don't mean just kind of tick box teaching, but sort of teaching and learning that's really embedded can't be underestimated. I think, we've all got to really double down on this and continue to learn and refine and practice these human skills. Whether you're early talent coming into the organisation or at C-suite level, we really need to ensure that we're sort of powering our organisations with human intelligence and human connection, particularly in the face of AI. I think the organisations that really continue to invest in the development of human skills will be the ones that drive forward and excel. So in terms of coming back to the world that we're living in and setting the scene in terms of the environment that's driving some of the behaviours of the next generation and the way in which they engage with the workplace and the way in which they engage with their development and career journeys, we need to sort of understand how to engage with them, how to create a learning journey or development program that's meaningful and that resonates and kind of sticks. So what's the state of play currently in this sort of crazy world that we're living in? I think clearly an era of on demand. We live in a kind of everything now, and Gen Z have really never known anything else. So they've got instant access to everything: music, shopping, information, entertainment. It's all available immediately. And what this means is that, I suppose, attention spans are shorter, and not because necessarily of lack of interest, although I think sometimes if you're not in that space, it can sort of come across in that way. But I think they've just learned to scan for relevance of that information really quickly. And if it's not relevant to them, they move on. So they're impatient, they kind of struggle with rigid processes and systems, and they want everything immediately. They want the interaction immediately, and they want it to be personal. So in terms of a program, if you're not quick, if you're not clear, then they've kind of moved on. And then secondly, in the stage, in the kind of age of social media, the pressure, everyone knows the pressure to be perfect is kind of everywhere, and the social media has a lot to kind of blame, I suppose, for this. And they're constantly exposed to really filtered lives. They often feel inadequate. We've heard a lot about imposter syndrome and how that plays out. Self-comparison, performance anxiety. I think all of it feeds from this kind of perfect life that they think they should lead, and the mental health issues and the anxiety and the burnout are coming a lot younger and hitting seemingly a lot harder than sort of ever before. So I think in our development programs, we need to create environments where anxiety can be discussed and normalized, and where presentations don't have to be perfect and human conversations don't have to be perfect. We don't have to be having a human type conversation as if we're robots and sort of looking at AI for what type of answers should we be giving a question that our managers asked us or our colleagues asked us to make sure that we get it right. That the whole nature of imperfect is where you learn. It's where the growth happens, and it's where the learning really happens. So that needs to be encouraged. And then they are highly individualistic. So they're living in this sort of hyper individualized world, personal brands, personal playlists, everything sort of tailored to them as individuals. And so what this means is that they can sometimes feel isolated if they don't have that if they don't have that kind of community or sense of belonging that they also really crave. They do love to be connected. And so again, we need to ensure that our development programs are kind of creating this sense of cohort connection and inclusion that they, even though they're living in this sort of individualized world, they do crave. And then, I mean, there's been so much that's been said about the post-pandemic ways of working, how it's impacted on working styles and how early talent are being supported. Clearly, the hybrid working has meant so much less in terms of informal coffee chats and learning by osmosis or reflecting on a conversation or asking someone to read a quick email or scan something that you're about to send off, that happens much less frequently. And so that idea of sort of loneliness and self-doubt and everything kind of creeps in, because they're working on their own a lot of the time, having to kind of make those decisions by themselves. They haven't had that kind of in-person university experience, and so there's that gap in terms of confidence that I'm sure you've all noticed with your cohorts. Speaking out, asking questions, they don't know how to do this confidently. They're not confident to do it. So we need to again start to close that gap between the kind of expectation of our line managers and our business sponsors, and then the reality of what their skills are coming into the workplace. But thankfully, they are sort of prioritising learning and development. They do really want to learn, and it was ranked 3rd in the recent Gen Z Deloitte survey. So let's provide these environments that resonate with them and that they can engage with. And then uncertainty, and then looking at AI and creating that sort of uncertain workplace. You know, AI is exponentially changing the world in which we live and work. There's no doubt. And so I think coming back to the importance of human skills, you know, that will be what sets organizations apart. And it's creating an incredibly uncertain future for the next generation. They don't know what jobs will exist. They don't know what the source of truth is. They don't know how and when AI should be used, and neither do really, you know, we're all still trying to figure that out within our organizations. So we can't expect them to understand how to use it. And even more, we need to develop our leaders so they're ready for this kind of constant change and able to navigate uncertainty, be resilient, remain kind of agile in the workplace. And then finally, there's just so much information out there that they need to consume, coming at them from all angles throughout one recruitment process. Most of them are going through like 20 recruitment processes. They're getting emails all the time from all of these people. Then when they finally get made an offer, they have so much to absorb and learn before they even walk into the organization. So as early talent teams and you know, development experts, we really need to take accountability for ensuring that some of that noise is really filtered, and that they are really clear on what their learning journey is, and making it relevant and making it kind of connect with the wider business and vision. And then this will drive their engagement. They'll understand why they're there, what they're learning, what the purpose of it is, and overall the programme will be more successful. So I hope that sort of sets the scene a little bit into what we're going to look at. We'll now move on to look at kind of what we can do to kind of support graduates in terms of facing into some of these challenges so that they can succeed. So in terms of the first thing that we need to look at really is ensuring that there's a robust development ecosystem in place. And I'm going to hand over to Anna shortly, but I just wanted to kind of introduce the concept, and it's critical in ensuring that learning is embedded beyond the workshop, because they have a variety of different support mechanisms in place. And as early talent, you know, development managers, development program partners, we really play a pivotal role in ensuring programs are aligned with the overall business objectives and vision, and communicating this to early talent cohorts sort of really early on, part of the recruitment process, but again, embedding that information through the pre-boarding journey and making sure that that's embedded and that they're engaged. And then the importance of line manager training. I think we've all experienced the fact that, you know, line managers can make or break the success of a program, and getting line manager buy-in and involving sponsors in the design and structure of the program is really critical. And this doesn't mean sort of just an initial training session and then passing the baton over, off you go, goodbye, good luck. But as early talent teams, we really need to foster communities of practice amongst managers so that they can learn and share experiences and that sort of thing. So And we provide managers with worksheets, for example, post sessions, so that they have an understanding of how to support with that embedding of the learning, so that they're bought into the entire process throughout. And then Jo will come on and talk about the business innovation challenges that we've been working on with Belron, and how they can play a really important role in terms of that immersive development, which always sees a really high transfer of learning. So I'll pass over to Anna to talk about the coaching ecosystem, particularly in a bit more detail.
Thanks, Jenny. It's great to be here to talk about something I'm hugely passionate about, which is coaching, particularly with early career talent. So what I wanted to do to begin with was bring this ecosystem a little bit to life by using an example of my previous organisation and what we did in terms of bringing actually coaching throughout that as a red thread. So just a little bit of background. The challenge that we had was to refresh a graduate programme, and the programme was designed to build future leaders in a large conglomerate based in Asia, actually. But there was a lot of emphasis on development. So we were very lucky and fortunate to be able to look at every part of our development interventions. But we wanted to make sure that every development intervention had an impact, not just theoretically, but also ensuring long-lasting changes in behaviour. We know that acquisition of knowledge can be quite different to actual application and gaining mastery and skills. And so for us, the ecosystem was really important. Personally, I'm a trained coach, and I've also been coached many times. So I've experienced on both sides of the equation. And so I decided that I wanted to ensure that coaching was a fundamental part of this ecosystem that surrounded the development of our graduates. So we had the early talent team who were specialists and able to support. And we obviously also had a more traditional development programme consisting of classroom and online training in both technical and human skills. But we wanted to go a bit further, and we wanted to make sure that we were very clear about the roles and responsibilities across the organisation, and also embedding this idea of coaching mindset across everything that we did. So with our line managers, we upskilled them in their coaching skills. So making sure that they were not just instructing and resolving issues, but they were also using some coaching behaviour to help develop their direct reports. So in the back end of exactly what Jenny was saying, we also made sure that they were developing their own skills. So we had peer-to-peer coaching of the supervisors, so they could talk through the situations that they were encountering, and also drop-in sessions that allowed them to develop their own skills. I think it's important to highlight here that there is some difference between coaching people to develop and help them improve versus coaching a high performer who needs to be stretched. And we covered on all of those sorts of tactics as well with our coaching. We also, just as Jenny was saying, kept in contact with our line managers. So ensuring that whenever we were making a learning intervention, be that a webinar or a face-to-face experience, that we were also embedding that learning back to them and communicating with our line managers about what we were focusing on. So, for example, adding actions or nudges or questions that they could bring and discuss with their graduates when they came back to the desk and had those experiences. Many of you will also have touched on mentoring programs, and you can see it here in their ecosystem. For us, it was really important that we labelled quite clearly what the difference between mentoring and buddying and coaching was, so that we had very clear expectations on all fronts. But mentoring really for us was around navigating day-to-day life in an organisation, and that was with people who were maybe 5 years of experience down the line, and they were able to talk through their own experiences of what they were encountering or what they had encountered and give advice. Buddies were similar, but a peer-like sounding board for their questions. And then we also added in something called career counselling. And for us, that was a deliberate intervention based around the fact that there is plenty of well-intentioned but misinformed career advice given by people in the organisation. And so we actually took time to develop a programme and support people within the business, certain people, to be able to have discussions about career paths and also how do they make decision makings. And that was already around everything that we had within the organisation. So what were our career paths? And that worked particularly well because it allowed us to not just support our graduates, but also support the wider population. Now, all of those that I've just talked about have coaching embedded into it, but effectively are part of the general thing. So there wasn't any extra cost in terms of what we were looking there, apart from the setup cost. But we also used, and I'm going to talk about this in a little bit more detail, on-demand external coaches. As a trained coach and early and career specialist, I definitely see the value in using coaching to help learning stick. In my view, it can provide a really safe space to process and practice and experiment with situations that graduates are facing. It's a very clear sounding board around real-time challenges. So they were coming to us, coming to the coaches, and talking about situations that they might be facing that they're not quite sure how to deal with, so preparing for that, or equally reflecting on something that happened and downloading it and thinking about the learning that they had experienced. That allowed them to build a resourcefulness and sustainable learning practices. If you embed these sorts of things quite early, they then understand what they need to do in the future to protect themselves. And I'm sure if any of you've been coached, you may also catch yourself coaching yourself sometimes with problems that you're encountering. This individualized support came to it with coaching and our on-demand coaching, a bit like just-in-time practice, I guess, in factories, where when it actually mattered, they were able to talk about it, download it, and actually come up with a strategy to deal with it. And I think that's one of the real benefits of having coaching. And as Jenny talked about earlier, that's something that's really particular, I think, for this generation coming through, where everything is very individualized and they know what's going on for them. And then finally, one of the things that I think is really valuable in coaching is the accountability. And if a person is coached, then typically there will be an accountability process after that, which will mean that if they are going to do something and they talk about doing something, that you can actually follow through and make sure that the action really takes place. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about how we set up this coaching, because it's not something that is often in programs. And one of the first things we had to do was demystify what coaching was and how it worked best. So we did give them a kind of, this is the sort of things that you would expect to talk about in coaching. But we also ensured that the first session that every one of our graduates had was mandatory. We focused it around their first transition or first major transition, and it was a time for reflection around what they'd experienced, but also setting up for success moving forward. You can also put it on the back of a training program, I believe, to cement what they've taken away from there as well, to take it further forwards. We then gave every one of our graduates the option to have up to 3 sessions, per year on demand. So that was either when they chose it, so with something that they felt they want to talk about it, or either us in the HR team or their line managers might put in a place, and if we thought that they might need some upskilling or support. And then we had one final mandatory coaching session when they rolled off the programme as well. And that gave a nice closure. It also allowed them to set themselves up as they transitioned from being a graduate into a more permanent type role. In terms of what we found, actually, one of the things I wasn't expecting to see, but came out very, very strongly, was a correlation between the people that were performing best in our organisation and their ability and want and desire to have more coaching. So actually what we found was that those people we really wanted to spend on, the people we felt were really high performers, were actually benefiting most from the coaching programme. We did have some that wouldn't use it very much, but we also used it for targeted application. So for example, if a graduate was going in a geographic transition, adapting to a new location and culture, we would use coaching then, and that was really successful. We also used it, as I mentioned before, where we felt that there was an intervention that could be helpful to that individual. So some of our people that maybe had a small issue in terms of their performance, we would then encourage them to take the coaching sessions and work with the coaches to ensure that they were developing things. So for example, professional presence. And one of the things I think that really came out with that was that they were often surprised that they weren't just given tools to be better at, say, presentation skills, but they were also working on kind of the real reason behind perhaps they had some concerns about standing up in front of people and how they presented themselves to others. So that was really, really helpful. All the interventions we made increased our retention across the whole of the programme. So I can't tell you it's directly on the coaching, but I think it had a really, really main part to play in that. But we did get a lot of feedback around the fact that coaching had given them the chance to overcome challenges that they were facing in the organisation. It allowed them to be able to download and discuss in a psychologically safe environment. And in my view, I think there were some occasions where we actually also were able to support them at time before anything escalated to be maybe a mental health challenge that we weren't necessarily anticipating. And sometimes having that safe space to talk about things was allowing us to put the protection in before it actually became a real issue. We were very specific about how we set up the coaching. We wanted to ensure that the conversations they had were in a very confidential, safe space with the coach. And therefore, we only really heard back about broad topics that they were covering. But now, as a coach, an external coach myself, the types of topics that come up regularly are things around career doubts and anxieties, imposter syndrome, how do they balance their work life, how do they deal with situations, maybe they've had a piece of feedback from their managers that wasn't so good, or they're struggling with a team member, how do they deal with those sorts of situations? So they're the sorts of things that come up in the coaching space. I think also being an external coach has shown to me that there's also some conversations that I can have and reiterate that sometimes it's very difficult for a line manager or a supervisor or somebody else to discuss. And I can ask the questions to ensure that they understand and maybe cut through some of the noise to make sure that we're really getting to the right problem with them and addressing it and making some changes. I think one other area that we saw was that it can alleviate some of the pain points of oversharing, so that business leaders can focus on what's really important rather than hearing all the woes of a recent graduate. And I'm sure some of you have heard your leaders complain about all the oversharing that they get. And I think sometimes that helps. So one final area that I'd like to just cover on is around cost and applying something like coaching. I'm very aware that a lot of people are very concerned that it's a C-suite benefit to be coached and it's perceived as expensive. However, bringing in coaching for us really helped build some skills and fundamentals that they could take beyond their early years into their future career. So I think that the benefit of it outweighed the cost for us. But there are some ways that you can reduce cost. You can use laser coaching sessions, which would be much shorter, so 15 minutes to 30 minute sessions. And obviously that can reduce the cost. Go in with a specific issue, go and talk about it and move on. You can also use group coaching, and I know Jo's going to pick up a little bit on that with the action learning that they've put into Belron as well, and how that can be useful. One thing I will say on group coaching is it does take quite an experienced coach to be able to facilitate those sorts of learning so that everybody maximizes from it. But that can also be a way that you can reduce costs. And then it would be remiss of me not to mention AI coaching, which I definitely think is an option. And I think it is really brilliant at cementing habit changing and goal setting. But I do feel that it's not quite as sophisticated at this point to replace real life trained coaches. And as Jenny also talked about, there's a desire in this generation to have human to human contact. So one-to-one coaching can be really, really useful. So that is all I wanted to cover on coaching. I hope it's been useful, and I'm happy to answer some questions at the end. But really, for me, what it brought to us was this ability to, in an information saturated world, it allowed us to cut through the noise and empower graduates they felt invested in and supported as they went through the first few years of their careers. So I'm a great supporter of coaching. Back to you, Jenny.
Thank you so much, Anna. Yeah, a brilliant way to sort of make sure that learning is embedded and that graduates are successful, which is at the end of the day what we want to all try and achieve. So I'm going to hand over to Jo really shortly. But before I do, I just wanted to show you, and this, I know this diagram looks incredibly busy, but I just wanted to bring it to life in terms of an example of the Belron development programme. Kicking off with global and local inductions as you'd expect, but then implementing more of a themed approach to learning, with each theme sort of linked and building on the one that came before. And this is really important when we talked about earlier around that cohesive learning journey, to ensure that real relevance and to drive engagement. So as a graduate joining Belron, they'll be able to see exactly what they're going to go through at what point in time and how it all links together. And as a line manager or rotation manager or business sponsor, they'll also be more invested because they can then see how it links to the overall vision and objectives for the programme. So each theme creates that time and space, not only for workshop interactions, but also for that action learning period where the workshop learning can really be embedded, either through the huddle groups or one-to-one coaching, or time with line managers or rotation managers to kind of practice what they've been taught back in their teams. So Jo's going to focus in on one of the themes that the 2024 cohort have just completed, which is the Business Innovation Challenge. And some sort of anecdotal feedback at this stage, really hot off the press, because we've literally just finished it. But yeah, over to you, Jo.
Great, thank you so much, Jenny. Yes, so the business challenge was really an integral part as we were building out the programme. Graduate programmes for Belron is a very new thing. We are a global organisation of nearly 30,000 employees, but having something that was a global, consistent development programme for those early in career was fairly new. So we launched last summer and had 17 graduates join us across the UK and the US as our first group. And as Jenny says, we've been partnering really closely with Amberjack to build out that development programme and experience for them. And we wanted the business challenge to be a real opportunity for that action learning piece to take place. We wanted it to really reflect life and culture at Belron, to help the trainees to understand what it's like to work within the organisation and to be able to start navigating and building connections across the different countries and functions that they were operating within and beyond. So we went to our CEO and his executive team to say that this was something we really wanted to build in and to get their buy-in, and asked them to help us identify 3 global challenges that we were really already focusing on as an organisation that were strategic for us in terms of importance. And they came up with 3 great questions and challenges for the group to then be able to work on. So as I say, we really wanted the trainees to be able to experience that opportunity of collaborating, not only within their own function, but across the other functions of the organisation, to learn what it's like to be part of a remote team, to have to connect into stakeholders that you've perhaps not had an official introduction to understand how do you start to collate data and varying options and opinions from across the organisation. But we also wanted it to offer back to the business a fresh perspective and to be able to offer that early in career lens back to the organisation on, as I say, these 3 challenges that were of strategic importance to us. And that piece was really key for us in terms of setting the trainees up for success. Anna and Jenny have both spoken a little bit about that imposter syndrome and some of that concern and lack of confidence as individuals are coming into the workplace. So making sure they really understood that we wanted their opinion. It wasn't just go and do this piece of work. We wanted them to really analyse it and give us their recommendations and their thoughts, and bring that back to us. Have the next slide, thank you. So as Jenny said, we've had these themes that we're building out across the 2 years. The Business Innovation Challenge was approximately 20 weeks in total. We split the 17 trainees from the 2 countries down into 3 groups and gave each group one of the questions to work on. I think when we initially set this out, it felt like a long run time, but the reality of working on a large, complex challenge, working across time zones and working with a newly formed team, I think everyone quickly realised that it was good to have that sort of 3.5 months to really focus on that challenge. So whilst they were working on those business challenges, the Amberjack team were really supporting them through these workshops and action learning periods. So we designed it so that we would give them the development workshop and that opportunity within their huddle groups to really have a safe space to explore the theory, test the tools, and really understand some of the development opportunities for themselves before they would then go into the next phase of the project. So, for example, early on, we really set them up for success around thinking about project planning, assigning roles and taking responsibility and accountability individually and collectively as a team, how to manage your stakeholders, how even to identify that stakeholder heat map that you would then need to go and connect with, and how were you going to do that? So how were you going to ensure that you showed up individually and collectively in a way that really enabled those stakeholders to engage with your project and support you in the way that you required them to? So we did all of that before we even gave them their challenge questions. We set their questions, I think it was at the beginning of February, and then they would obviously going through that sort of investigation and exploration period. And we did that throughout. You can see the themes there that we worked through for them during that period. I think one of the key ones to call out is that courageous conversations. I think initially they felt that they would be utilising those tools and that learning back out into the business, but actually as the project went on and there was all the usual opportunities, challenges, tensions that a diverse project team often experience, they realised that the real power there was that peer-to-peer support as well, and being able to have those conversations with one another at times to keep themselves true and to support each other as they move through the experience. The project had a grand finale of a 4-day global meet. We were lucky enough to be able to bring our US trainees over to the UK. And so with very short notice, I have to say, Amberjack did an amazing job of building out a 4-day experience for us. And we worked with the group on things such as connected teams, global ways of working, harnessing feedback for growth, and of course presenting with power. So we had 3 days together looking at those themes and really building that connection and confidence whilst also giving them time to practice their presentations. They then on the final day did their presentations back to our CEO and our board members, as well as their managers, their mentors, and one another. So it was a big ask of them. They're still only 8 months or so into the business. And so it was really giving them not only that end goal but being really results driven and giving them the accountability that this does matter. You have a very interested and engaged audience that want to hear your recommendations and findings. And I won't read through the slide that's up, but you can see it really did resonate both with the global meet and the business challenge itself for the trainees. As Jenny said, this is pretty hot off the press. We are still working through the feedback from our stakeholders. I did have a lovely email from the leadership team saying, you know, we need to do more of this. This was absolutely fantastic. And also holding me to account to make sure that we take some of the amazing recommendations the group made and we are working with the business to get some of those implemented. So it has had a real impact for the organisation as well as the individuals. But what we really wanted, as I say, was that accountability and that real life learning. We wanted to make sure it was really reflective of our working environment and our culture at Belron, but also to make sure that we were doing everything we could to help that transfer of learning so that it was long-term established habit changing and development for all of the individuals.
Brilliant, thank you, Jo. I know there was a lot to squeeze into that time, and I'm conscious of time. So just some pictures of the wonderful trainees, but I know some people probably have to drop off. If you don't, then please do stay on. In terms of just to close, and we'll share this deck so that you can have a look at it in your own time. But some summary points which hopefully will really give you some tangible actions to take away and think about implementing in your own organizations if you aren't already. Hopefully you can take one thing and take it back to your teams and talk about it and think about how you can implement it. Human skills, absolutely critical. Prioritize them. Potentially more important than technical training, particularly when in the face of AI, and they'll be absolutely critical in terms of powering organizations forward. Human insight, emotional intelligence, the list goes on in terms of the benefits of learning all of this stuff and keep on learning it. And then that cohesive, interconnected learning journey, which is really supported by that broader development ecosystem to make sure that there is that buy-in, it is aligned to business objectives, and then the transfer of learning into the workplace will be high, and ultimately so will return on investment. So it's sort of a win-win all round. And then, immersive learning, Jo brought to life so well the business challenge. It is more memorable, it is more sticky. We ran some escape room type interventions on that 4-day meet, but a business challenge is a great way to achieve this, and it means it's relevant, it's got good business support, everyone can kind of see how it's connected to the overall learning journey. And then coaching, absolutely sort of invaluable, and Anna touched on lots of ways that this can be brought to life to support early talent. It's not just a C-suite luxury. It's definitely a great way of ensuring that early talent have the support that they need, particularly in the remote or hybrid working, the rise in mental health, the confidence issues, and all of the stuff that I said at the beginning around the environment that they're working in. Coaching can really help in terms of creating that safe space for that one-to-one support and further embedding that learning. So that's all for today. If anyone does have any questions, Jazz, I know we're over time, but I know we've still got a few, I think, people on the call. If there were any questions, then happy to answer those.
We had one during the session, but I think Anna kind of answered that as we went along, actually.
Okay, perfect. Great, well, I'll let you get back to your busy days. Thanks so much for joining, and please do get in touch if you've got any questions or want to pick up the conversation further. And thanks again to Anna and Jo for joining me. Pleasure to see you both. Bye for now.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.